Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the West Sussex Record Office. My name is Wendy Walker, and I'm the County Archivist. I'm delighted to welcome you all here tonight for another very special edition of West Sussex Unwrapped Live. A few words of housekeeping before we begin. We will be recording this as we go, and we're going to be putting it up on the Record Office YouTube channel in a few days' time. So you can catch up with it later and hopefully recommend it to family and friends as well. If you have any questions as we go through, if I could ask you to type them into the chat box, then I'll monitor that as we go through, and I will read them out to the speaker at the end with your questions. Well, it's very good to have you with us tonight, and I think we've got a very special evening lined up for you. Tonight's event brings to a close the second series of West Sussex Unwrapped, a project that we've been running since the start of the pandemic. Working with our colleagues at Screen Archive South East, we've been exploring the history of the county using both of our collections. And we found that we have a great deal in common and many interesting themes that unite both collections. West Sussex Unwrapped Series 1 ran for 10 episodes in 2020 and finished with a Christmas special. And we launched Series 2 in February this year. And tonight's episode brings that current series to an end. For each episode, we've been bringing together documents and films on different themes in a regular blog that you can find on the Record Office website. And our topic for this episode is West Sussex Cinema. The blog went live at 10 o'clock this morning, and we have with us tonight an expert in the field, Dr. Frank Gray, who is the Director of Screen Archive South East. Welcome, Frank.
Hello, thank you, Wendy.
We have some wonderful archive film footage to share with you tonight, but you may find that the quality varies and depending on your internet connection. Before we start, I would also just like to make you aware that one of the films contains a stereotyped representation of a Native American man, which some viewers may find offensive, and we will say a bit more on that just before we run the film. And now I'll pass you over to Frank to begin our evening. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Wendy. And I'm going to take control of the screen and start my slides. And there's my first slide. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. I've had the pleasure of running Screen Archive South East for over 25 years. And part of that work obviously introduces me to all aspects of film history in West Sussex. And that, of course, includes not just films made by professionals and amateurs in the county, but also to the role that cinemas have played. And that is the subject for my talk this evening. Of course, too, I'm very aware, as some of you might be aware, that when we talk about cinemas, we're talking about so many things. It's just not what's on screen. It's also, too, the fact that we're talking, a very significant part of this history is about purpose-built buildings designed by architects. So it's an architectural history. It's also a social history, because so many audiences, people we know, love, remember, we have been part of our past, our cinematic past, if you like. So it's a social history, it's a cultural history. It's also a history to do with urban planning, because the way in which cinemas, their positions within towns, cities across the county. And these are also too about the beginnings of cinema, but also to their demolitions. So all of these histories come to bear when we look at the history of cinemas in West Sussex. As Wendy has mentioned, I run Screen Archive South East. We're a regional film archive based in Brighton and in Chichester. And we collect films for the southeast of England, West Sussex, Kent and Surrey. It's a very, very organic collection, which begins with films made in the 1890s and continues to this day. As a collection too, of course, it is film, but it's about all that, it's the long history of projected media. So it includes magic lantern slides, film, video, and now of course, digital files. And our collection, which is very organic, connects with so many different aspects of the county's past. It includes, as I mentioned, lantern slides, but it's family films, films made by industry, the armed forces, the health sector. There's that short and fascinating history of feature films being made on shore and beach. Also the history of cine clubs, and of course the Royal Sussex Regiment collection. So it's an organic collection, and what of course is so valuable to us is that often films come to us where they come without a maker, without any information about them. But thanks to the fantastic collection of the West Sussex Record Office, a lot of our films, their historical nature has come to light because of the way we brought together, for example, newspaper accounts with the films. And today our website is our window onto the world, because it's here. By visiting it, you can look at films across our collection. Why am I stumbling? I don't know. And within the search box, it's very, very sensitive to place, so that you can put any town, village across West Sussex into the search box, and if there is material available in the collection, you will then see it. My interest in the in West Sussex Cinema, of course, started a long time ago, 1996, and that was a book project produced by the West Sussex Record Office. And the three of us, Alan Isles, myself and Alan Redman, we worked to tell the story of West Sussex Cinema. So it was, and it combined, the book combines both a narrative history, but also to a gazetteer, going town by town in the county and trying to chronicle all of the cinemas, both those few survivors and the others which sadly are no longer with us. To look at this history, there are 5 key moments, 5 key periods. And obviously I don't have time today to actually go into detail. So this is very, very much a kind of introduction to the various moments in this history. It begins with first screenings, 1896 to 1910. This is when film was very much in its infancy, and traveling peripatetic showmen are going to everywhere in the county. They're going to theatres, piers. There were even screenings in the asylum in Chichester. So these are the first screenings which take place over a period of about 15 years before the arrival of the first permanent cinemas. Then something quite spectacular happens, because the move from temporary, irregular screenings to the arrival of the first cinemas in the county. This starts in 1910 to 1914. There are almost 20 different cinemas were born in this period. Almost all of them were conversions, taking existing buildings and making the adaptations required to turn them into cinemas. There's then the caesura of the First World War, and then the 20s and 30s sees a spectacular period of growth. And this is when the picture palaces appear. These are the purpose-built cinemas, many of a very fine architectural nature. And this period, of course, really signified the fact that this was an industry which was incredibly dynamic and had the means to actually create new picture palaces everywhere. The fourth stage is quite different, and indeed marks the fact that many of those picture palaces did not survive to the end of the 20th century. And it's in the 1990s that sees the arrival of the multiplexes within leisure parks. And then finally, we're into this new century of ours. And in many ways, cinema, of course, continues. And indeed, we can see it as being reinvented, reborn in particular places within the county. When we put together that book on the history of West Sussex cinemas, of course, we stopped in 1996. So multiplexes and new developments were not part of that book. This evening, I'm going to concentrate on, begin by concentrating on 3 cinemas in West Sussex: the Heath, Hayward's Heath, Whitehall Cinema, East Greenstead, and the Corn Exchange in Chichester. They've been chosen because we have, within the Screen Archive South East, a film for each one of these cinemas. And we're pretty confident that each film was made by the then cinema manager, and that they were all, by and large, the managers are always men, that these managers chose to make a film in order to promote their cinemas and develop their audiences. So I'm going to introduce you to these 3 cinemas, and then we'll look at the 3 films. So we begin with the Heath Theatre in Hayward's Heath, and I've highlighted it. There are a few photographs of it, not many. It opened on Boxing Day 1911 on the Broadway. It was the town's first cinema. It had around 400 seats, and it was an adaptation or a conversion of an automobile garage. Like cinemas, like first generation cinemas in West Sussex and indeed in the country, there were 2 programs a week. Prices ranged from 3d to 1 shilling, and provided opportunity to sit in the stalls very cheaply, but also in the more expensive balcony. Now, the film which we have of the Heath Theatre is of an audience of children and parents leaving the cinema. And by doing newspaper research, I'm very confident now that we can actually date this film to the 8th of February, 1930. So the Heath Theatre, as it was called, well established by 1930. And of course, what's I think interesting about this film is the way it both celebrates and promotes the popularity of Saturday morning pictures for children. Tantalizingly, at the very end of the film, we see a few frames, not many, of the theatre staff, ushers holding torches, and also other staff associated with the box office, the projection box, and refreshments. And the final shot is of these 2 gentlemen, who I like to think were the managers of the cinema. And what was on the screen? And when you would see those little glimpses of the cinema in the back of the film, at the rear of the film, what you see is the words, "the Baby Cyclone." Well, this is what was being shown to the children on that Saturday. And it's a dog movie. Produced by MGM in the United States in 1928. And the Mid-Sussex Times described it as an hilarious version of a stage farce. It tells how a harmless Pekingese puppy brings a happy engaged couple to the verge of estrangement. It'd be interesting to see that film now. Unfortunately, it's lost. And so many films from the silent period, which 1896 to around 1930, so many of those films are lost. Occasionally they turn up. And of course, in terms of films made regionally, the scale of that loss is quite astonishing. Some have estimated that films made in the silent period is at 1%, 2% have survived. So it's always special to us when we find silent films made in the region. Now, Mr. James Van Court, he owned the Heath Theatre, and by the beginning of the 30s, he became aware that he could not move into modern times with a converted automobile garage. So what does he do? He builds a new one on the same street, Perrymount Road, Broadway, which opened in 1932. And it was double the size. Oh, sorry, I'm just oh yes, almost double the size. But his ambition did not stop there, because he built another one as well. What was he thinking? To have that he could have two cinemas on the same road in Hayward's Heath. This one was even grander, the Paramount, because along with the cafe, it also had a dance hall. These cinemas, though, of course, didn't have a long life, especially when they were two cinemas owned by the same company, really looking at the same audiences. Unfortunately, the Broadway closed in 1952, and the Paramount followed 30 years later in 1972. The closure of the Paramount meant that Hayward's Heath, life with its own cinemas, unfortunately, that came to an end. And sadly today, Hayward's Heath is without a cinema. You have to travel to the Orion and Burgess Hill in order to see a movie. Now to the Whitehall Cinema in East Grinstead. It opened in 1910, towards the end of the year, and it was very much a hybrid, because the Whitehall Theatre and Skating Rink, as it was called, was a mixture of a theatre, a skating rink on a maple floor, and with 800 seats, it had both stage shows and the cinematograph. It had been the hall itself had been built in the 1880s and was named the Grosvenor Hall. The Whitehall, what is particularly interesting to us is that we found a 35mm film, very short, only about 5 minutes, and it was made by the then manager, the first manager of the Whitehall Cinema. His name was Frederick Maplesden. And what's distinctive about Mr. Maplesden is that he made local newsreels for his film, for his cinema audience. Now, these local newsreels were, of course, of local events, and it was a very, very good way of bringing new audiences into a cinema, because he was filming local events. He would advertise in the press that he was doing this, and he would say, come along to my cinema and watch yourself if you were attending, for example, the Fire Brigade Sports. To think in a program in the Whitehall Cinema circa 1914, when I believe these local newsreels were made. It was about a 3-hour program with short features, long features, cartoons, national newsreel, and with Maplesden edition, local newsreel. The other intriguing aspect is the way in which this short compilation of films made by Mr. Maplesden for the Whitehall Cinema also engages with the First World War. There is one I think it's the third section, is the arrival of the North Somerset Yeomanry in the town. This is late August, early September 1914. The First World War only started on the 4th of August 1914. And this is a key moment in the history of the war in the town, because it marks the arrival of troops. A convoy of horses and carts, and of course they are making their way to the training ground at Forest Row. And the film compilation concludes with the unveiling of the East Grinstead War Memorial in July of 1914. The cinema, the Whitehall Cinema, starts 1910. But incredibly, as the West Sussex Unwrapped blog on Sussex Cinema states, incredibly, it was bombed by the Germans. A German fighter dropped bombs on the 9th of July, 1943, around 5 p.m. And tragically, 108 were killed and 235 were injured. And the Whitehall Cinema was never rebuilt. And finally, in this triptych of films in our collection which deal with early cinemas. The final film is associated with the Granada Cinema in Chichester on East Street, which of course, the Granada Cinema was built within the Corn Exchange. Now, the Corn Exchange has a very long history in the city. Opened in 1832 as a corn exchange with its fine colonnaded portico. It was also the host for one of the first film programs in the county. And this was Miss Maggie Morton's traveling show and her presentation of the pantomime Bluebeard. And this first screening took place on the 26th of December, 1896. And the founder of this cinema in Chichester within the Corn Exchange was Joseph Poole. He and his brother Charles, for a number of decades before the arrival of cinema, had been touring the country with their My Riorama show. This was a quite astonishing entertainment because it was like a giant Chinese scroll, a mile long, and you went on a tour around the world with Poole's My Riorama. So you can imagine sitting in the Corn Exchange in Chichester, and you'd be going on a Poole's tour. It would always begin with a British port, conclude with a British port, and along the way you would go North America, South America, Australia, New Zealand, and each time you got to a place, the moving panorama would stop, and out would come performers who would sing and dance in a way related to the country where the panorama had stopped. It's Mr. Poole, Joseph Poole, who begins to transform the Corn Exchange into a permanent cinema. And it's the Granada, which will effectively become, as it was become known, and the Granada chain took over the cinema, over the Corn Exchange in 1946, orchestrated a number of changes, increasing the cinema capacity to 900. And so from 46 to 1980, it was a functioning cinema in the center of the city. But then it closed down, and then it's now gone through a number of transformations. It was a McDonald's. It's now a set of retail shops, which includes a Next. And on the side, on the west side of the building, you can still find a Centenary Cinema plaque. Now, the film, which we have acquired, related to the Granada / Corn Exchange, is one dedicated to the promotion of a double bill in 1953. You can see the ad from the Bognor Regis newspaper, and then two posters for the films which are shown in this double bill, Hiawatha and Jalopy, both of 1953. The film we have is of a publicity stunt to promote the two films. We know that the films were on at the very end of August of that year, so we're assuming that the publicity stunt probably took place in the weekend before to promote business. And the publicity stunt features this chauffeured limousine with a European dressed up as a Native American, children also dressed up, and cutouts of the two leading characters from the film Jalopy. And as Wendy introduced you to the fact that you need to be aware that within this film, this film presents an outdated, disrespectful, and offensive representation of a person from the Anishinaabe First Nations of North America. It's a film of its time and does not reflect the current values of either Screen Archive Southeast or the West Sussex Record Office. So I am now going to bring the film into view and enter full screen and start it, if I can find where to start it. Oh, there it is. The film is silent, of course. Heath Theatre on the 8th of February, 1930, A Winter's Day. It's a nitrate film, so it has that kind of sepia tone to it. And the children and the parents wearing their winter clothes. We've done a number of projects over the years which have used our films to look at everyday dress, and because fashion historians are really interested in just what kind of clothes are worn. This film would be a very good example of just a day in 1930 in a Sussex town. And as a promotional film, it's perfect because there are just so many children and parents in it. And you can see it wouldn't take much to promote this film, to say, you know, please come and see yourself next week. The women wear cloche, some of the women wear cloche hats. They also are wearing fur. That gentleman, and well, these two gentlemen, I like to think they're the managers of the cinema. And this is the staff, with ushers and maybe the projectionist and the box office staff. Now to East Grinstead and the compilation made, a compilation of local newsreels made by Frederick Mapleston. This is London Road, turning into the High Street with Lloyd's Bank on the corner. Who is marching? Well, later on in the compilation are the Fire Brigade sports. This march may be associated with that. From the parade, we then turn to views of the town. General views, you can see the word Whitehall in the distance, and we know it's London Road. I also think the film is a very good example of the transition, because we're presented with, obviously, with two modes of transport, both the horse-drawn and the new combustion engine, and how by 1914 they're still sharing the roads. So that transition from horse-drawn to combustion engine wasn't something which was instant. It was quite a period of transition. Another thing which is significant about this film, of course, is it's silent film, but it would never have been seen in silence. It would always have been a live narration, drawing attention to detail, pointing out things. So literally providing an audience with a sense of what is on screen. This is the Fire Brigade sports. You might not be aware that Fire Brigade sports was very, very common, not just in West Sussex, but across the country. It goes back to kind of the 1890s. As volunteer fire brigades starting to become more and more professional and were being supported by local rates, it became very common to have fire brigade sports because it demonstrated the expertise of your local fire brigade. In this case, you can see the hoses are getting the hoses out. It's a manual pump. And then, of course, this is all being timed. How long does it take to get set up? And as you'll see in a second, to be able to fire the water jets into the air. And you're about to see the water. And of course, as a record of event, there it is. And as a record of this particular event, it also, of course, concludes with the prizes. I've done a little bit of hunting in the local press to find this particular event, but I haven't had any luck yet. Listen to the very high angle of the camera. Now, a few stray shots of East Grinstead Station. And now the arrival of the North Somerset Yeomanry. The same shot, again, of London Road into the High Street. And we know with some certainty, this is the end of August, beginning of September of 1914. And they're all making their way to the training grounds at Kidbrooke Park, Forest Row. They were in residence and training for about 2 months. And because we know that they departed for France on the 2nd of November, 1914. The Sussex Agricultural Express reported that they were destined for an unknown destination. So that was obviously France. And now finally, and this is the sequence which concludes this local newsreel from the Whitehall Cinema in East Grinstead. This is the unveiling of the East Grinstead War Memorial on the 23rd of July, 1922. The memorial itself was designed by the sculptor Ernest Gillick. And as ever with films of this kind, it's always remarkable that a compilation such as that, made in 1914, is in private hands, lovingly looked after, and finds its way to an archive. And now finally, the film Did You See Our Jalopy in Chichester? This is the filmed publicity stunt on East Street for the double bill of Hiawatha and Jalopy. There's the Granada Cinema / Corn Exchange. And the film is a set of traveling shots. So there's a vehicle, as you can imagine, just in front of the limousine, camera on a tripod, and the camera operator, keeping his balance, gives us these very smooth shots as the limousine makes its way along East Street. We're going westwards. And you can see the gentleman with the headdress and the tomahawk, war paint, children behind, and the cutouts from the graphic of the 2 stars of the Jalopy, a film, one of the many films featuring the Bowery Boys. The film is promoting Hiawatha and Granada, but of course for us too, it also becomes a real time machine, because to reveal so much detail of the city on this day, because of the clock on the Chichester Cross, I'd like to think that it started at 12 and it runs for about 15 minutes or so. So this is midday, maybe the Saturday before the screening. And now we're going eastwards, of course. Towards Eastgate Square. The Granada again, and the camera tilts up to reveal the name, the Granada Exchange. And there is Shipham's. Both the Record Office and ourselves both have an interesting collection of material related to Shipham's. In the background there is another Chichester cinema. That's the Gaumont, which opened in 1937. And now finally we're coming towards the end. And the film will conclude at the Granada. And now I've returned to my slides. The three films you've just seen are all associated with those three cinemas, which were all first generation cinemas, which started around 1910. I just want to now introduce you very briefly to these other phases in the histories of West Sussex cinema, beginning with the era of the picture palaces. And quite astonishing when you think that there were, I've counted them, I think I'm accurate, 19 purpose-built picture palaces were built in the county from 1919 to 1940. They were all either in a modernist style or neo-Georgian. These were single screen cinemas with seating from 400 to 1,500. Unfortunately, these buildings didn't have long lives. The shortest was about 25 years, the longest is about 45 years. Failing audiences across the 60s led to a lot of this destruction. And this history of closures and then demolitions continues until the 1990s. Of those 19 fantastic picture palaces, 5 have survived. It's possible to go into the history of each, but we don't have time to do that today. But Bogdan Regis Picture Dome, the Worthing Dome, the Orion and Burgess Hill, now called the Capitol in Horsham, and the Worthing Comet Theatre. These are the 5 of that period of that great boom period of the 1920s and 30s. Two of the cinemas, of course, are in Worthing, the Dome and the Comet. The Dome is full-time, as you know, the Comet is part-time. But what's really interesting is just the way in which they introduce us to different periods of cinema development and also to different architectural styles. The Dome Cinema is 100 years old this year. I hope they had a great party. For me, the most impressive picture palace, which is no longer with us, of course, is the Odeon Worthing, which opened in 1934. A fantastic building. It was described as the Rolls Royce of Oscar Deutsch's Odeon chain in the 1930s. With its streamlined modernist style and its distinctive clock tower, it looked like it was a modern ship on land. It had over 1,500 seats, and today, if it had survived, would be seen as a great work of 20th century modernism. The inside, of course, these picture palaces are all single screen cinemas, fantastic Art Deco styling, and also too a Compton organ, which was on its own lift. And out of the orchestra pit, at the start of a program, it would magically rise up, and there would be the organist who would give a performance before the program began. A short history of the building, of course, gives us an insight into what happened to so many buildings, so many picture palaces of this period. Opens 34, it's a single screen. In 1974, it's subdivided, rather crudely subdivided into 3 screens. Then it's a decade later, in 1984, it's sold to property developers, and its last screening will take place in 1986 after 52 years of service. And then finally, 1987, it's demolished. And therefore, out of 14 of those grand picture palaces in the county, they all come to their untimely demise. When we were producing West Sussex Cinema, this was the point, seeing all the great picture palaces. What that book does not deal with, of course, is the rise of something else. With the dedication to providing audiences of the 1990s with as much choice as possible, saw the rise of 2 multiplexes in the county, both in Crawley and Chichester. And both, of course, are part of these new things called leisure parks. The buildings themselves, unfortunately, gone is gone as any architectural interest. They're sheds. So they're very uninspiring as buildings, but of course the emphasis for the new multiplexes was what went on inside, because the multiplexes they actually started in Milton Keynes in the mid-1980s, but the multiplexes are at the forefront of introducing not only new cinema technologies, but also new seating layouts to give a kind of heightened experience. This is the Chichester Gate Leisure Park, aerial view, and there within it is the Cineworld. It opened in 2003. It's a 10-screen cinema. The one in Crawley is 15 screens. Interesting too how these leisure parks are built on brownfield sites, as they're called. In Crawley, it was the demolition of the town's football ground, which created the space for the new leisure park. And in Chichester, it was the demolition of the gasworks. It's interesting looking at, as I did briefly, this Chichester City's plan of 2003 was called the Southern Gateway Development, and it lays out all the promise for this new leisure park. Both the Cineworlds, Chichester and Crawley, are today, they're very advanced, given that their use of range of projection systems, 2D, 3D, and IMAX. And what's astonishing is that Crawley also has something called 4DX. In this cinema, the seats move and vibrate. There are leg and back ticklers. And also too, at the key moments within this usually fantastic films, you will find in the air fog, bubbles, rain, and even snow. And of course, the leisure parks use cinemas usually as the anchor point, because around the cinema, these multiplexes are a range of entertainment and leisure experiences, whether it's bars, restaurants, bowling, fitness centers. And of course, all this is possible by having very large car parks. Now, I want to conclude this evening and take us into this century by looking at Horsham, because I think that Horsham provides a very interesting model of what's happened to cinemas and particular towns in this century. And there are 2 cinemas, which are 2 sites which I'm interested in. The first is the Ritz. This is just down from Horsham Railway Station. This is a cinema, one of those first picture palaces, built 36. For a period of about 30 years, it was continuous the Ritz, then it becomes part of the ABC chain. And then its course changes. Instead of being demolished, it's acquired by Horsham District Council, and they establish it as an arts centre. And they begin this concept of seeing the building as hosting both theatre shows and also film shows. And of course, that combination takes us right back to the very beginnings of cinema, because film shows were within multi-purpose venues. So the Horsham Arts Centre, if you like, turn to history in order to reinvigorate what began as a picture palace of the 1930s. It then took a step further and has completely redesigned the exterior with this spectacular glass atrium. And it's renamed it, so it's no longer the Ritz, it's now called the Capitol. And it's a very successful multi-arts community venue with a 410 seat theatre, 2 cinema screens, studio, and a gallery. And for those who have thought that, you know, cinema would not survive, you know, the death of the not the death, but to lose so many picture palaces, some saw that as indicative of a culture which was moving away from going to the cinema, but just watching at home. And of course, that threat is still with us because more and more of us, so many of what we just consume on film and television, we all do it from our devices at home. But the Capitol example is creating a multi-arts community venue which can bring everything together and serve a town and a wider community. There's something else, though, of course, which has happened in Horsham, and that's the opening of the county's newest cinema. And now this is different again. The Everyman Horsham opened in Peary Place, which is a redeveloped part of the town centre. Yes, opening in 2019. The Everyman Horsham is what some now call a specialty cinema or a bijou cinema, because it's dedicated to comfort and service. Unlike those other cinemas, the picture palaces, 1,500 seats, this is very small. This is very intimate. Has three screens with a maximum of 240 seats. And each cinema features a mixture of double and single sofa-style chairs, complete with small side tables. And with a tablet, you can order food and drink, which is served to your seat. So it has a mixture of the kind of the quality of service which you found in first cinemas, but also to something which is very much to do with our time, trying to create a cinema experience which is, with the sofas, a bit similar to home, but obviously the quality of the projection and sound will be something which you can never ever reproduce at home. So my short tour concludes now with these images. The Corn Exchange, Chichester, 1910, a photograph taken while it was programs were presented by Joseph Poole, and that picture you've just seen of the new Everyman Horsham. Who knows what's going to happen next in terms of cinema history? But whereas in 1996 we would think, is this coming to the end? Well, it hasn't. And despite streaming and despite the internet, it's wonderful that cinemas in the county still have a very, very vital life. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That was fascinating. Both the films themselves and your account of the history of cinema in West Sussex. Really interesting. We've got a few questions for you, which I will start to read out. Before I do that, we are going to be launching a short feedback poll, which is just a few questions. So for those of you who've joined us, if you are able to answer that for us, the questions, it would be really helpful when we're planning for our future events. So thank you. Right, going to the chat box. Of the films you hold, do you have just tape films, or do you also hold films on VHS, DVDs, or even USB sticks?
Oh, well, All of the above and more. One of the challenges, and why I often am envious of a record office, is because, you know, when you look at a record office collection, you know, an important part of the collection is on paper. But when you move into moving even image technologies, they are continually changing. So what our challenge is to have an understanding of the changing moving image technologies, and work out the best way of dealing with an actual film, say 35mm, 16mm, a videotape, could be VHS, it could be beta, broadcast standard. Then, of course, too, as we enter into the digital era, films as files, which can be found on DVDs, Blu-rays, and of course, too, today, a file which can just be uploaded. So understanding the different technologies and recognizing too that yes, the technologies are different, but also too, each technology does configure the moving image in a different way. So the size of the screen changes, the sound changes, the colors change. It's yeah, don't get me started on this one. This is such an important issue, but it's part and part of the nature of what a moving image or a film archive does.
Thank you. And I think what you were saying earlier about films that were lost also reinforces how important it is to have a screen archive. And yes, we're still, I mean, film archives are still being discovered. And you still find stories of things that have been found, both in terms of national films, of BBC films, but also local films come to light as well. So
it is, and the well isn't dry. We're
no.
still, the material still being uncovered. Today, often it's not the film, which is, a lot of institutional collections have already come to us, but it's the films people have at home. And often it's when a film is passed from one generation to the next. So the grandparents' film, and the grandparent may well have made the film, but when it gets passed to the grandson, the granddaughter, they don't have a film projector. They can't actually see it. So we always like to get involved in circumstances like that, because it's always very special to be able to see a film a family member has made, and see it for the very first time.
Thank you, Frank. The next one is, please show the list of surviving cinemas in West Sussex and the link to the film archive in East Sussex. Can you put it in the chat?
Yes, I think I can. It'll take me just a second. Yes, where are the film archive for East and West Sussex, Kent and Surrey? So there's not a different film archive. We serve the region as a whole. And one of the reasons why we came into existence was because we found that that it was viable for a film archive to be established in the Southeast by a coalition, or indeed federation, of record offices, one museum, and 2 universities coming together to say, yes, this would be a great thing for our region, but to make it possible, it's something which we need to share. So that sense of a federation, indeed a sense of a partnership, has also been very important. I'm just going to pop in to the chat. This is a list of the picture palaces, not all of the cinemas, but just the picture palaces. And so that's the list of picture palaces, which were, these are the 19 built from 1919 to, 1919 to 1940. And it's 5 of those which have survived.
Thank you, Frank. Now, the next question is, when did the Park Cinema in Chichester open, and can you comment on the caravan at that site?
Oh, well, thanks to the great Roger Gibson, the new park in Chichester has been such an important cinema for the city and the county, given its focus on independent film. Does it start late 1980s? I think so, ish. And of course, it's still growing strong. And the caravan, which they use as a little screening room, and becomes particularly important during their festivals because they use it for interviews, and occasionally their short films, which they put on within the caravan during the festival. I'm a great fan of the new park, and over the years we've done many shows showing films, West Sussex films within the new park.
Thank you. And I think probably one final question here. What kind of archives can you use to find out about the history of cinemas in West Sussex? So aside from the films themselves.
Well, very good question. Obviously, our book, West Sussex Cinema, is useful. I was told only yesterday that the record office in West Sussex Library still has dozens of copies, and they're on sale now at only £5, so it's a real bargain. But that book is really, really valuable. Alan Isles, a cinema historian, is so methodical. And so that provides a very, very good overview up to 1996. But there's a lot more to learn. And for me, if I was investigating the history of a particular cinema in the county, I'd be going to the West Sussex Record Office, probably also local studies libraries as well, because I'd want to be looking at anything and everything related to the history of that building and its audiences. And that would take me to newspapers, look at photographs, who knows, somewhere there might be some posters. There also might be architectural plans, but you'll find that in terms of unlocking, let's say, use the word unwrapping, we like that word, unwrapping the history of a particular cinema in the county, going to the West Sussex Record Office is the best place to go. Now, of course, what's on screen, that would take you in another direction, because to uncover what's on screen, starting with newspaper accounts, newspaper advertisements, but then there are a whole range of international resources which can introduce you to the particular films and what they were like and who started them, etc. But it's a history which will never end, and I can't imagine a better project than beginning to kind of investigate particular cinemas.
Because I was just going to add one more to that, and that was the licensing registers. Because
Yes.
the Act of 1909 was really the first attempt to regulate cinemas in any way, and it gave local authorities power to inspect and to make sure that they were safe, particularly from the fire perspective. And so the licensing registers give you the details from 1909 of the different cinemas that were operating and who was responsible for them. So that I think is a good source too.
I'd agree. And the cinematographic regulations as set by Parliament are fascinating because they begin largely to do with health and safety, because the film stock used from 1895 to 1951 was nitrate, and it could self-combust, and there were occasionally serious fires breaking out. So how to protect the audience and indeed the projectionists from a nitrate fire. That's the cinematographic regulations or acts. First is safety, and then the second becomes content. There was very little. The subsequent acts after 1909 increasingly deal with content, and it leads to the creation of the British Board of Film Censorship. Now it's called Film Regulation, and censorship standards, and also to the kite marks for films from Universal to R for adult, or 18 for adult. Yes, but that, and still today, if I wanted to use in a film festival, a film without a BBFC certificate, I would have to write to a local authority and seek their permission to use it.
Well, thank you, Frank. It's been a fascinating evening, and I think it's been a really wonderful conclusion to our second series of West Sussex Unwrapped. And I would encourage everyone to do what we've done and to look at the catalogue of West Sussex Record Office online, look at the catalogue of Screen Archive South East, and see where you can find the links.
Yes.
Because it's been a fascinating journey for us, and it's something that anyone can do. You can go onto both catalogues and start looking for your favourite place or subject or period, and who knows what interesting places it will take you to.
Couldn't agree more.
Just to remind you that you can catch up with this on our YouTube channel in a few days' time, where you'll also find previous editions of West Sussex Unwrapped, and you will also find other things as well. And all of our blogs are still up on the website. Our Tuesday evening talk programme is continuing, so next Tuesday at the same time you will have Jenny Mason, our collections manager, and she will be talking about the Queen Victoria Hospital archive in East Grinstead, the Guinea Pig Club, and it's called Stories from the Surgeon's Table, so that's one not to be missed. Martin Hayes, the County Local Studies librarian, will be talking about the extraordinary photographic collections at Worthing Library on the 26th of October. And then Joe McConville, who's our project officer for the Transatlantic Ties project, will on the 30th of November, will be talking about the American connections and documents in the West Sussex Record Office. So you can find out details of all of that on our website. But I'd like to conclude this evening by thanking Frank for a really wonderful talk and evening, and thanking you all for coming. And we very much look forward to seeing you next time. So thank you and good night.
Thank you, Wendy. Good night. Bye-bye.